maybe you don't have enough money to invest at the moment. Maybe you have medical debt or credit card debt or any of a number of things. Like maybe you're not making your ends meet. Okay, so what can you do with the strength that you have now? And if there's nothing you can think of that you can do with the strength that you have now, what can you do to get stronger? And financial strength, that could be, all right, so based on the skills that I have now, how can I increase my earnings?
What does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit in that? We tackle those questions and others in the School of Financial Freedom podcast. We talk about the role of money in our personal growth and spiritual liberation, the concrete math of budgeting and saving and investing, and how all this relates to the life you are meant to lead. Each episode is an interview with a former student of my online course, Financial Freedom 1, where they explain their favorite lesson and years later, what financial, behavioral, and spiritual impact it had on them. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of School of Financial Freedom, and your host. Glad you're here.
Hi, this is Rachel, and you're listening to the Financial Freedom Podcast.
I'm excited to do this episode today because we're doing lesson 3.1, which is the Stockdale paradox and financial self-determination. A lot of people say that they remember this lesson the most years after taking the course. So I'm excited for you to learn about Stockdale paradox and introduce you to our guest today, who is Rachel.
I am a currently unemployed engineering manager. I live in Portland, Oregon. I have for a little over 10 years now, but I'm originally from Oklahoma. And I like to make things. I have done a lot of different stuff. I played the harp. I briefly piloted airplanes before landing in computer science as a profession. On the side, I make art and build gardens and currently quite into woodworking.
And you have a fantasy to start a laundromat.
I do. I really would love to start a laundromat. I should start making a plan so that it's less of a fantasy and more of something I can actually pursue, which is really relevant to today's lesson.
Well, when did you take Financial Freedom?
I think I took the first one in the summer of 2022.
Okay. So you are a couple years out from Financial Freedom 1. Why did you choose this lesson?
I think it's really important. And there are parts of it that are really crucial. It's a lesson about acceptance. And that's something that I certainly have struggled with. And I think all of us struggle with from time to time. And it can be quite hard, especially in the current media environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lesson about acceptance and determination, which is the Stockdale paradox. So why don't we get into it? Tell us about Stockdale paradox.
All right, so the Stockdale paradox is named for Admiral James Stockdale, who was captured and held prisoner for 8 years during the Vietnam War, and 4 of those years were in solitary confinement. And somehow, throughout his entire experience, he kept unshakable faith that he would return home and he would see his wife again, and that this would be one of the defining experiences of his life, that he would make this into something that was really valuable to him. And what he noticed from his experience is that the most optimistic of his fellow prisoners failed to make it out alive. They, the ones who would say, oh, we'll be out by Christmas or we'll be out by Easter, that eventually that those people died of broken hearts. Whereas Admiral Stockdale sort of really recognized the reality of a situation and took specific steps to improve it and to deal with it without clinging to this idea that, some near-term solution is going to appear. So it's a paradox because you do have his his unshakable faith that things are going to work out, but But when you just have the faith that things will work out and not the actions to push things towards working out, then when things don't work out, it's more crushing. So you have to pair your belief in a positive future with acceptance of how things are now and actions based on how things are now.
Do you have a quote that from Admiral Stockdale that sums up the paradox?
Yeah, let me pull it up.
I can say it. You must combine optimism with brutal honesty and the willingness to take action.
Yes.
Talk to me about how does Stockdale paradox, this ability to combine reality with the willingness to take action, is connected to personal finance and financial freedom?
I think in a lot of ways. So if you just say, oh, like it will work out somehow, I will be able to retire someday, or someday I will be able to buy a house, and don't pair that with an understanding of, okay, here's where I am now, and here are steps that I can take that move me closer, then you're not going to get there. It's just, there is no magical solution. I know a lot of folks, particularly on the progressive side of things, like really don't want to participate in the system that we're in. Like capitalism can be really brutal, and American systems in particular can be really cruel. Like I'm paying $1,000 a month right now for health insurance. Dang. And that's like through a marketplace plan. It's just remarkable. But if you don't get to opt out, and you will absolutely, because you cannot opt out, you will lose the game if you do not play.
Yeah, there's no not participating.
There is no not participating. And I think my current situation is a good example. I've actually never done a job search where I didn't have, like, it wasn't sort of do or die, where it wasn't I have only done job searches where I don't currently have a job and I have a limited amount of money to find a job and start making money again. And so, but it's always worked out in the past. I have always eventually acquired new employment. And so I could have just been telling myself, well, it will all work out. It'll be fine. You don't need to worry about it. And then spent all of my time, woodworking. But that is unlikely to be successful.
Well, it's interesting because, in the progressive circles that you and I live in, most people have a pretty sophisticated critique of capitalism, but it sort of stops there, right? Like, we can talk about the problems with capitalism, but it's not an excuse to be bad at money. And
yeah, absolutely not. And the question that the Stockdale paradox really brings to me is, what can I do with the strength that I have now? What can I do to push the outcome in the direction I want things to go with the strength that I have now, with the resources that I have now, as the person I am now? And like, none of us individually can end capitalism. Like none of us individually can overturn any system that we find to be unjust or reprehensible. So what can you do now with the strength that you have now? And for me, that answer is like, build the financial stability and the resources to be able to take care of myself and to have extra to be able to help other people. I am fortunate to have been have really excellent education and to be skilled in an area that currently is quite highly valued by capitalism. And those are things, those are part of the strengths that I have now that I can use to push the needle in the direction of a system that I believe is more just. Like, that is money to perpetuate myself, which is an important part of being able to move the needle. Because if I am struggling, if I don't have what I need, then I'm not going to be able to really have an impact on the system as a whole. So I want the money to take care of myself. And then once I have that, that gives me a stable place to be able to start pushing for the changes that I want to see.
Yeah, it's funny. I always say that there's just no excuse for being bad at money. Like we weren't taught this when we were kids, like which is either, I don't know why we don't teach this in schools, but we don't. But there's no excuse to be bad at money as an adult. Like you're a grown ass adult, and being bad at money places a burden on the people that love you and care about you. So, as you're saying, learning to take care of yourself allows you to take care of others.
Right. And that's, I also find it really interesting that they don't teach this in schools. I had an economics class in which we made like model businesses selling pens. And, we went all the way through like, market positioning and all this stuff. But like, no one taught me how to do taxes or like the basics of compounding interest or all of these really important concepts. But even if you weren't taught, there are explicitly as part of your education, there are so many resources out there, like the School of Financial Freedom, which has been absolutely transformative for my relationship with money and my ability to even conceive of the future. I was at a grocery store recently, and I overheard two employees talking about how they would never be able to retire. And it took a lot of self-control to not like barge into their conversation and be like, I also used to believe this. Here, let me tell you about the School of Financial Freedom. Because I think that belief, like that the system is going to crush us all, that there's no way to win, that there's no way to get ahead, that is a delusion that keeps you from taking action. Like, you have to ask yourself, what can I do with the strength that I have now? Like maybe you don't have enough money to invest at the moment. Maybe you have medical debt or credit card debt or any of a number of things. Like maybe you're not making your ends meet. Okay, so what can you do with the strength that you have now? And if there's nothing you can think of that you can do with the strength that you have now, what can you do to get stronger? And financial strength, that could be, all right, so based on the skills that I have now, how can I increase my earnings? And like asking yourself those questions and not being willing to accept either by the time I would want to retire, we will be in a socialist paradise, which is like the optimistic viewpoint, or the fatalistic viewpoint. By the time I would retire, the whole world is going to be collapsed anyway, so it doesn't matter. Both of those are two different delusions, and neither of them will help you.
Yeah, it's funny. One of my favorite Zen masters, Dogen, says that all spirituality is just acceptance of reality as it is.
It is one of the most difficult things. I actually have a post-it note on the monitor of my computer that says, "What am I resisting?" Because so much of our suffering in life, I think, comes from resisting what is.
Yeah, and resisting the second half of it, which is, your ability to be responsive, your responsibility to change, right? Like I think about that story you're telling me about in the grocery store, and those two workers. Yeah, you cannot retire based on what you're doing right now. What life is asking you is to grow and to change. And the fact that it's difficult is the difficulty is the reason that you're going to grow. We all have a resistance to change. The status quo is always easier. And I think financial freedom is not only a path towards, financial liberation, it is actually a path to the personal change that you need in your life.
Absolutely. It's really changed the way I have approached my relationships. One of my money habits, we'll call it a money compulsion perhaps, was to try and like fix feelings with money. Like, to try and fix my anxiety or my siblings' anxiety or my mom's anxiety by throwing money at things. And I have stopped that because of financial. I think I might have continued that indefinitely without having gone through Financial Freedom 1. But like sitting and really looking at that and looking at how it's not effective. It's not effective, and it is just like it was really creating financial hardship for me. And being able to recognize that like the feelings just are, and that it doesn't need to be fixed, and that trying to fix it with money is potentially even detrimental to the relationship. That's been hugely transformative for me. Yesterday, my mother's beloved service dog died, and my parents are heartbroken. And I was reflecting on the lessons from the School of Financial Freedom, and like in the past, I would definitely have attempted to solve this with money in some way, in as much as something like this can be solved with money, you know, which is not very much. Unfortunately, like dog necromancers are not a thing. But instead, I just, I called my mom yesterday and we just cried together because there's nothing, this is what is, and it sucks and it's sad, and there's just nothing that can be done for it.
Yeah. I mean, your story makes me sad because I have a beloved dog, and I think a lot about the day he dies. But what you're bringing up is this line that my friend Jordan Granite says, which is, money solves money problems, right? But the majority of us, we use money to solve other problems, or we try to use money to solve other problems, and it just doesn't work.
It really doesn't. So I've seen a lot of people, and myself included, trying to use money to solve feelings problems. It fails pretty much 100% of the time.
That's the secret, right? All marketing and advertising is triggering feelings problems so that you will use money to try and solve them.
Right? And they have been honed over many, many, many years to like be extremely good at manipulating us into spending money to try and solve our problems. Like I think about women you didn't used to shave their leg hair. Like that is something that like marketing invented basically because they wanted to sell more razors. And they're like, hey, we're artificially limiting our total addressable market here because we're only selling razors to men. And so they created like this giant social phenomenon of like to hairless women. That is something that marketing made. And I find that to be both really terrifying and kind of amazing. Marketing is super powerful. I actually left Instagram because my Instagram ads were so extremely good. And I, for the most part, did pretty well at not just like randomly hemorrhaging money on things that Instagram wanted me to buy. But I decided that it was that I was basically, willpower is limited, right? And that I was wasting it resisting advertising. So at every opportunity I get, I try to reduce the amount of advertising I'm exposed to.
Yeah, I mean, this function. What we're talking about is attention, right? And our attention is limited. And when you pay attention to Instagram, you're paying attention to all the ways that you're not enough.
Right. I know there's anxiety and depression have been really on the rise among young people, and there's a lot of research that connects it to social media use. And I am just so glad that I was a teenager before social media.
Yeah, me too.
That I don't know how I would cope. Not well, I would imagine.
You're blowing my mind with this idea that women didn't used to shave their legs, or I assume their armpit, before marketing. Because functionally, those things are trying to make women look like children.
Yeah. Creepy, right?
Yeah, you're blowing my mind.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are lots of other examples like that. So I know the intense gendering of children's toys, that is also a marketing invention. Prior to like the advent of mass marketing, children were not really strongly disambiguated on gender until they were, in the 7 to 9 range. Prior to that, like they all, if you ever look at pictures of Victorian children and you're like, is this a boy or a girl? And you can't tell based on their clothing because they're all wearing the same dresses. That's how it a lot of it used to be. Like, we didn't really strongly gender children until the advent of mass marketing. And like, market segmentation has, I guess, sales advantages. So pushing strongly gendered things means they can sell more stuff, because then, you can't reuse your girls' clothes for your boys, or your little boys won't play with dolls because it's only dinosaurs and monster trucks for them. So like, it basically, the more different gendered children you have, the more things you have to buy. So marketing is a hugely powerful force shaping society, and it's kind of alarming because it's really pretty unregulated. Sure, like, they're not supposed to directly lie to us, but you can really mislead a lot without directly lying.
Well, I mean, the most basic lie is there's something wrong with you. Like, nothing ever gets sold unless someone believes that there's something wrong with them. The not enoughness that they trigger is the fundamental lie. It occurs to me that the market segmentation that you're talking about is really about creating a more specific identity over time. Because as identity gets more and more individualized, you can sell things to create that sense of identity. And unfortunately, what it does is it removes us from community.
Yeah, and that's something that I feel really keenly as I've gotten older, is sort of the disintegration of communities. Like, and it's not clear how to enter a community anymore. Previously, churches were a big part of American life, and those sort of formed the centers of your communities. And then you also had all kinds of fraternal organizations, like the Masons, but also like the Elks and the Kiwanis, and that formed nexuses of community. And I want that in my life, but I don't exactly know where to find it. American churches have, I think, in many ways, really jumped the shark. And it's I was raised Methodist, and like, I think Jesus Christ is a remarkable individual, and his teachings rad. But there is so much in American Christianity that doesn't, from my perspective, reflect the teachings of Christ. And then as an adult, like, I have been gravitating towards Buddhism, but it doesn't feel like Buddhism doesn't feel like it has the same kinds of communities around it the way Christian churches would. And so it's just like this question of like, well, man, I'd really love like a secular church where everyone was welcome, and like we could just get together and build that community. Because that's when I talked about trying to solve feelings with money, the actual solution to those feelings problems is connection. It is like strengthening that community and strengthening that relational bond, and leaning into the shared difficulties. And I would love to see more of that in our society. But circling back to the marketing aspect of it, now as we're seeing like the advent of a really sophisticated generative AI, like, I don't believe we're seeing this yet, but there is definitely the possibility of like advertising that is literally tailored just for a single individual being, and having that produced at scale, where taking all of the data that Facebook has accumulated on you, and by the way, Facebook accumulates your data even if you don't have a Facebook account, like taking all of that information, all of the tracking information that all of these tech companies have accumulated, and like generating ad campaigns specifically to you. Like, that's technologically possible now, and it is only a matter of time. And wow, once we get there, it's an entirely new flavor of advertising poison.
Yeah, it's interesting. The advertising I see when I search on the internet is, based on my searches, but it doesn't have a degree. It's sort of a very gross take at me. It's like, oh, I searched for a car yesterday, so I get the car ads, but I don't really want a car. But what you're talking about is like a deeper level of sophistication.
Right. I mean, so we are very close to the point where, they could be like deep faking videos of your sibling being like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we spent time doing hovercrafting? Buy this hovercraft today so we can spend time together. Like,
amazing.
Probably there will be legislation that prevents advertisers from deep faking your siblings or your other loved ones eventually, but it probably won't come until after it's already started happening.
Well, unless you somehow consent to it because you're using a free website.
Oh gosh, you're right. That's
yeah, it's interesting what you're talking about community, because that was the basis of my old business, Portland Underground Grad School. I always said it was half learning and half community. Many of us had, some of our deepest experience of community were in school. So I wanted to create that for lifelong learners. You're making me miss that. But again, now we're talking about the brutal reality of capitalism. Let's go to the other side, which is the determination to take action. Anything to say there?
One of the things that they advise you when you're feeling really depressed is to just pick one small thing in your environment and clean it, because that reinforces this idea that you have agency and that you can make a difference, that the actions you take matter. And I find that really useful. Whenever I'm feeling like, oh no, is anyone ever going to hire me? Like, are things going to be okay? That's the moment that I need to stop and clean something and go do a load of dishes. Because those small actions compound. And sometimes you need to take the really small action before you can pull together the determination to do the larger actions. In really difficult times, I have found it useful to fuel my determination with spite. Very much, well, I'll show them.
Useful for short-term energy.
Yeah, useful for short-term energy. Long-term energy, I think, is fueling everything on spite is probably not great for your emotional well-being, and it's also pretty exhausting. But for short-term energy, it's a good way to get yourself started. And the thing is, with big long-term goals, like, reaching financial independence, it can be really hard to, you're not going to get there. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You're not going to get there immediately. And so how do you keep going? Where does the determination come from? And one of the things that I have found really useful is to celebrate the activity, not the end goals. I mean, certainly it's, great. Once you've reached your, I have 3 months of income stashed away milestone, sure, have yourself a party. But you need to celebrate the progress. You celebrate the act of doing it. Like every day showing up and doing that activity. And I really like James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. He says, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And so I think that determination is probably similar to willpower in that there's a limited supply of it. And so rather than relying on willpower alone or determination alone, you have to put in place a system that sort of keeps your determination going even in moments that you don't feel it.
Yeah, I think back, all the way back to James Stockdale, spending 8 years in a POW camp, 4 of it in solitary. And I wonder how he was able to do it. And I think part of it is he felt like his actions had meaning, right? And and that he had agency, as you mentioned, right? And it's super easy for us to feel like we're victims of the isms, right? Like racism, sexism, capitalism, ableism. But the fact that we think of ourselves as victims, the cost of that is that we remain victims.
Yeah, and it's really that's an insidious thing. So the job that I recently got fired from was my first management role. And there are definitely have been points while I was in that role and after having been yeeted from it that I thought, man, they would not have fired a man for this, or a man would have been able to get away with this, or I'm being penalized for being a woman, that kind of thing. Here's the problem with all of those thoughts is they can't help me at all. Like, if that's true, so what? Like, all of these studies on, how women and disabled people and people of color are penalized, like, they don't, none of them provide a framework for, okay, so here's how you succeed under these circumstances. They're all just like, hey, here are all the ways in which you're penalized. And like, you can't change it. You can't change that you're a woman or that you're disabled or that you're a person of color. Like, that is the hand that you are dealt. And focusing on the way in which the deck is stacked against you isn't useful to you. And that's one of the things that I often think about when I'm examining my own beliefs is you have to ask two questions. It's like, is this true? That's the first question. And then the second question is it useful to believe this? And a lot of times it's not useful to believe that whatever you're currently experiencing is the result of some ism.
I mean, when you say, is it true and is it useful, what you're talking about is Stockdale paradox, right? To go back all the way to the quote, it's you must combine optimism with brutal honesty and the willingness to take action, right? So you're talking, the first one, is it true? That's the brutal honesty. But the second one is the willingness to take action.
Right? And you have to have both.
Well, here's the interesting thing, Rachel. One of the things I always tell people is, okay, sexism, racism, ableism are all true. And, like if it takes you 20 years to hit financial freedom, but it took a white dude 15 years to hit financial freedom, so what, right? Like, all right, it takes you 5 more years. I can't tell you anything different, but what's the alternative? And the alternative is that you do nothing, and that's far worse.
Exactly. Like, if the alternative is give up, then that just gives away what agency you have.
I know you have notes that you took before this, getting onto this podcast. What other things you want to talk about?
We've hit most of them, but I want to talk about situations in which, so sometimes what the solution is. Like, that you need to increase your income, that you need to stop taking on new debt, that you need to start investing. Like, the specific steps that will get you to whatever your solution is. But sometimes you're in a situation and you just cannot see the solution. So maybe you are in solitary confinement in a prisoner of war camp. Like James Stockdale, he didn't know how he was going to stop being there. He just knew that it would happen. So in situations where you don't know what the solution is, how do you take meaningful action then? And one of the questions that I ask myself is, what can I do to be prepared for the solution when it presents itself? Or what can I do to be prepared to take advantage of the opportunity when it comes? Or what can I do to be prepared for the world after I figure out the solution, or, the solution comes down from the heavens or whatever? What can I do to be prepared for that? What comes next? And that usually sets out a course of action that will at least keep you moving. And keeping your plan is meaningless without action. You can paralyze yourself trying to come up with a perfect optimal plan. The perfect plan is way less important than getting moving and staying moving.
Yeah, it occurs to me that James Stockdale literally did not know if he was going to get out, but what he had was faith. And so everything he did in that POW camp was just a way of being. And fundamentally, that's, I think, what the path towards financial freedom does for you, is it's a way of being.
Yeah. And that's, sometimes you hear people say the journey is the goal. it is valuable to choose a path that even if you don't achieve your final goal, helps you live in a way that's in alignment with your values. And that's moving towards financial freedom, using the lessons from the School of Financial Freedom. Like that helps me live in a way that even if I never manage to attain financial freedom, which I hope to, but even if I never do, this has helped me live in a way that is in alignment with my values. It helps me live consciously. It helps me make choices with awareness. And that's really important to me.
Yeah, I think, I was listening to a podcast with Michael Mead, who's a mythologist, and he talks about this idea that the point of all the troubles that you face is to bring forth what's inside of you, right? Like if we're not challenged by life, we don't grow. This challenge is here for our enlightenment, basically.
The obstacles are the way.
The only way out is through, right?
The only way out is through. And when I reflect on the hardest times in my life, the things that I came away with are so valuable that I wouldn't trade those difficulties. And certainly like no one wishes for difficult times or for challenging things, but they can be really nutritious fertilizer for the garden of your soul.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like our egos definitely do not want troubles or distress. We always tend towards ease and comfort. But we have to balance that, right? Like we have to actually have, we have to have challenge in our lives in order to get to the places we want. And our choices is, we either face it or we back out. And, in capitalism, one of the great challenges is like, how are you going to make that? Well, we're coming up on our time, Rachel. Is there anything else you want to say?
I think there's one thing that really helped me reframe capitalism that made it easier for me to take actions, to have determination. And that is to think about all of this. This is a system, but it's a cooperative system. Yes, companies are competing with each other, ostensibly in a free market, but ultimately, it's a cooperative system. We are cooperating with each other to build things, to sell things, to exchange goods and services. That is a kind of cooperation. And the money that we're exchanging with each other, like that connects us all. And certainly we can look for other ways to bolster connection, but we are all connected through this system. And thinking about how it is cooperative and that it does provide benefits to us, that really helped me sort of reframe the system. And I mean, James Stockdale did very much the same thing, where he's like, this experience that I'm having now that is really difficult is going to be the defining experience of my life. Like, this is going to be huge for me. And so the framing is really important.
Yes. That is his story, right? That is the story of his life. Those 8 years in the POW camp. That's a great way to end, Rachel. And I just want to wish you the best of luck as you look for a job. I think you know this, but, I got fired as a lawyer, and it was literally the best thing that has ever happened to me. Like, and I think about those grocery store clerks who are stuck in their jobs. It's really easy to stay in the status quo. And from what it sounds like, you weren't really happy in your job. I was not happy as being a lawyer. And sometimes we'd be forced into the change that we have to make. I'm wishing you, and during this difficult time, no one wants to get fired, and yet, right? And yet, when you look back, as you said, the most difficult times are the most valuable.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Douglas. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me. It was great to talk with you.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners. You have been listening to the School of Financial Freedom podcast. We just did lesson 3.1, the Stockdale Paradox and Financial Self-Determination. Stay tuned for another episode coming next week. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the School of Financial Freedom podcast, where we ask, What does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit into that? We hope you enjoyed this episode and it helps you live with an increasing sense of empowerment, integrity, and agency in the world. For more information, resources, and to re-listen to this or any past episodes, visit our website at schooloffinancialfreedom.com. There you can find out when the next cohort of Financial Freedom 1, the online course is. If you've enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a review, as it helps more people find us and join our community of people interested in the intersection of money and personal and spiritual growth. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of the School of Financial Freedom. You can also find me on Substack, where you can subscribe to my popular newsletter, Money and Meaning. I also love hearing from readers and listeners, so write me at www.douglassoy.com. I'm grateful that you listened, and I hope that this episode has given you hope and insight into taking control of your finances to live the life you want.